All right, Ryan, should we move on to the bridge collapse?
Let's go to the bridge.
So obviously, Soccer and Crystal covered this yesterday, but the Key Bridge collapsed in Baltimore. Now 6 people are presumed dead. Workers who were, again, doing construction on that bridge, mostly is from what we know, 6 of them presumed dead. Now, the black box has been recovered. We're told that inspection crew overnight went onto the boat, which is still basically stuck in the position after the bridge collapsed onto it. So you have this bizarre situation, just utterly bizarre situation, but the black box apparently recovered, which is going to be very helpful because it looks like obviously this was, there was some type of power failure on the ship itself. There's a lot, we can get into this, but let's just start with B1. This is, if you're watching, you're gonna see exactly what we were just talking about. So this is the boat itself. This is basically where it is right now. You can see the bridge just collapsed on the bow. And the bridge is, submerged in the river. So that's, again, this is where they took the black box from because the boat is still exactly right there, basically where it hit. Now, interestingly enough, my dad happens to be a retired bridge inspector. So I made sure to give him a call yesterday. And there were a lot of sort of armchair bridge experts suddenly on Twitter yesterday, but there actually are also some real bridge experts on Twitter. One of them is named John Conrad. He runs the website G Captain, and they've had some really good coverage of this that basically comports with what I was talking to my dad about, that when you hit the pier in the way that you hit the pier, there's almost nothing you could do. There's basically, a lot of people have been talking about the fenders, where are the fenders on a bridge like that? It should have a fender exactly what it sounds like, some type of barrier around the different support structure parts of the bridge. And this one looks like it didn't have much of that. If it did, it was really minimal. And people are like, well, what? There's massive cargo ships going through here. Why would you not have fenders? When the bridge was built in 1977, I think, they didn't have ships as big and powerful as we have now. So bridges were constructed differently. It's really expensive to retrofit bridges for that type of thing. The other question a lot of people have is the tugboats. John Conrad made a really interesting point that, so actually the tugboats did escort the bridge. You're not required to have a tugboat escort under the Key Bridge, interestingly enough. And Baltimore, John Conrad said, is not alone in releasing the tugboats early. It's also something that happens, for example, in San Diego with the beautiful Coronado Bridge in the port of San Diego. So big questions about how many different ports are now going to be requiring those tugboat escorts. It does seem like, why would you not have the tugboat escort? At the same time, it also seems like this was like a 1 in a million chance. I'm using that, just as a phrase. I don't have any idea what the actual chance is, but a 1 in a million chance that you have this ship drifting exactly at the point that it did into exactly that part of the bridge, the pier, basically, and hitting it the way that it did.
Right, and I feel bad for some of these bridge experts because we don't really need it. I'm glad we heard from your dad, and we tried to get him on, but you said that he probably wouldn't be into it. We'd love to have him on at some point in the future, if we can talk him into it. But we 1,000-foot bridge loaded up with stuff, going something like 8 knots into any bridge anywhere is going to take it out. No amount of fenders, no amount of bumpers. Like, there's nothing you can do. I think just as a jobs program, I think requiring them all to have tugboats would be a good idea. A bunch of my friends from the Eastern Shore worked on tugboats, and they're great jobs for like single men in their 20s and 30s, because you're on it for. I mean, some of them were not single, but it's difficult for them because you're out for weeks at a time. But they're really difficult jobs. They're tough on your body. But you like make a ton of money in like a 6-week stretch, and then you're back on land.
It's the below deck ritual, basically.
Yeah, and you can't offshore those. I mean, they're literally offshore, but not far offshore. Yeah. But because you're only doing the tug operation, within several miles of the harbor. But yes, like if these ships are going to cut costs by not doing the proper maintenance and by otherwise, not having enough redundancies so that if you get a power outage, you just float into the pier or float into the bridge, then you ought to have some extra redundancies in the form of tugboats, though they'd have to be massive tugboats because these ships are so huge, but maybe they can be big enough that they can just be enough to like slow you down enough. Credit though to the crew for the Mayday call that they put out for people who haven't been following it closely. They were able to get a Mayday call out, and Maryland police and Baltimore police were able to get to the bridge fast enough to make sure that the traffic was stopped. There's a radio call from one officer who says, "All right, I've got the traffic stopped. I've heard that there's a construction crew on the bridge. I'm racing onto the bridge to warn them." And just as he says that, he hears back, the bridge just collapsed. So there just wasn't enough time.
It's a long
to
bridge.
Get to those workers. It's almost a 2-mile bridge.
Right. Yeah, it's a massive bridge, and from the aerial shots, it almost makes it look small. It's hard to have perspective on size when you have an aerial shot like that, where it's just water and a bridge, because it's just hard to compare to other things. But it's a huge, huge bridge. So even with the Mayday call, and we can talk about the Mayday call in a second, because there were all kinds of theories kind of bumping around yesterday, and I don't blame X for any of that in particular. I feel like even before X, Ryan, we'd all be at bars like speculating wildly about what happened, because it looks like such a 1 in a million chance. And again, many, many ships go through this port every single year. It's a very important, I think it might be like the 18th most busy port in the United States. Some like 850,000 cars in particular is one thing that passed through that port a lot. That's just in last year. So let's take a listen to this clip from Fox Business. This is Maria Bartiromo talking to Senator Rick Scott. And
this is B3, is that right?
This is, she brings immigration into the conversation.
A Singaporean flagged container. But of course, you've been talking a lot about the potential for wrongdoing or potential for foul play given the wide open border. That is why you have been so adamant. Why has the Republicans had such a hard time securing this border? The president says he's not going to take executive action. You know that.
Well, we all have to stand together. We all have to say that it takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate.
So I think that was like a kind of clumsy attempt to pivot the conversation that she was having with Rick Scott to immigration more than like a conspiracy theory. She's like, there's a possibility and everything like this.
All of us anchors have made some awkward transitions.
That's what it seemed like.
Maybe let's give her that one.
But other people were dead serious about some of these comparisons. In fact, so we can put B4 up on the screen. This is from Michael Flynn. And a lot of people remember Michael Flynn from the Trump administration. He says, this is a black swan event. Black swans normally come out of the world of finance, not military. The standard operating procedures for all U.S. ports, harbors, and bays that transit commerce and military activities are supposed to maintain an incredible level of discipline, rigor, and awareness for these very type events to not occur ever. Yet here we are. There are harbor masters for every single one of these transit ports in America that are in charge of assuring the safety of navigation. Start there. We can also then go
What's he trying to say, though?
So I saw like speculation along these lines.
Andrew Tate I thought he was in prison. How's Andrew Tate out there becoming a shipping conspiracy expert?
There were a lot of shipping conspiracy experts yesterday, and I saw conspiracy theories that weren't totally explicit, but that were kind of floated along those lines, or just conversations about what could have happened and how could this happen.
People saying it was hacked, and look how the Chinese took the power down and propelled it right into the bridge, all kinds,
And I don't
kind of nonsense.
I mean, I don't disagree. We were talking earlier that this is like an extremely unusual thing that happened, but explicable. Right. So it seems like there are pretty obvious explanations for exactly what happened so far, and that's not to say that either of us put it past our government to be involved in some shady business, but it looks very clearly like that's not what happened here. I don't begrudge people for asking questions at all, because trust in government is extremely low, not just among members of the public, but among members of the media, Ryan, including us.
And let's put B6 up to talking about trust in government. This is a scoop from The Lever. Feds recently hit cargo giant in Baltimore disaster for silencing whistleblowers. So this is a piece that looked at government documents from the Department of Labor that found that the company that runs this ship had recently, about 8 months ago or so, been hit by the Labor Department for this horrendous policy that it had of preventing whistleblowers on its ships from going directly to the Coast Guard or to other authorities with complaints and first having to route them through kind of company management. One of the people that complained about safety issues on one ship was subsequently fired, which he said was retaliation, which the Department of Labor found to be a credible claim and came.
Sounds like Boeing.
Yeah, and came after the company and said you cannot do that. Like you have to have more serious safety measures in place here. And so I think there's something interesting about the way that our reaction wants to find some type of conspiracy in this, because if there's a conspiracy, that implies that actually somebody's in control. We've got this, like somebody's got this. It's in that case.
And that's like what Michael Flynn was saying. Exactly. Was saying that there are harbor masters.
But there are nefarious people
yes.
who have their hands on all of this, and they use that control to then create this disaster for some reason that we will then figure out later. But the assumption there is that it's under control. That's a much more comforting thing to tell ourselves than it's actually not under control because we've allowed greedy corporations to take over our government and our regulatory apparatuses, and these Singaporean ships that can have low-wage labor from anywhere in the world without any kind of training or other requirements, and that they can fail to maintain the ship such that it has a catastrophic power failure and crashes into the bridge, because knowing that we don't actually have control is much more frightening to some of us than there are evil people who do have control.
Right. And knowing actually that sort of forces of oligarchy are really in control in this like haphazard like cocktail of different interests way. I think that's maybe the scariest thing of all.
Right, exactly, because that's much harder to take on, or at least it's harder to accept than because if you can find some QAnon type conspiracy here, then at least you can then tell yourself that you've kind of figured it out, rather than you live in a world where these oligarchs are chipping away at your ability to regulate safety in a way that just keeps people basically safe. And then, of course, it being Twitter, the racism surfaced and bubbled all the way to the top. A couple of tweets, really ricocheted around. We could put up B2 here, which is this is Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott speaking at a press conference, and you had not just this account, but a decent number of them say this is Baltimore's DEI mayor commenting on the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge. It's going to get so much worse. Prepare accordingly. And then I think B5, if you can throw B5 up there, DEI did this as another, just another clown on Twitter. But it represented a reaction that you did see, and because of Twitter's new kind of algorithmic efforts, and that where you can pay to get your racism boosted, it became a thing that people were talking about. First of all, can I say Brandon Scott, an illustrious graduate of my alma mater, St. Mary's College of Maryland.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I've been following his career as he rose up through Baltimore politics proudly.
Interesting.
He's class 2006. He was 6 years younger. He's 6 years younger than me, but he would have overlapped with my brother, who was class of 2004.
Interesting.
At the same college. So Brandon Scott, graduate of the best college in America, St. Mary's College of Maryland. So how dare anybody come at him? But also, there was nothing like he gave an eloquent performance. It's like cold out, so he's got a jacket on. And like, what's your problem other than the fact that he's black? And DEI, like, do people think that affirmative action is required for there to be a black mayor in Baltimore?
Well,
like, are people this stupid?
Yeah, I mean, so
Black population of Baltimore is about 65%. I think he won with like 75% of the vote.
I think it's just like, yes, I think unfortunately that conflation is now happening.
Yeah, that's what DEI means to people now.
Although I tend to blame people who insist on affirmative action, as a lot of Black Americans do, for casting that like stereotype, like putting people in that unfortunate position of like, oh, you're successful and Black, you must be a product of affirmative action.
Otherwise, Baltimore would have just the greatest white mayor ever.
Yeah, what was
the guy from The Wire?
Yeah, he would be great. But the DEI thing, actually, one point on that is, the David Sirota piece in The Lever that you were just talking about. I think there's a very legitimate argument about DEI and American infrastructure, and like I get that. I think we have funneled an absurd amount of resources that could have been spent in other places into some of these different initiatives, corporate initiatives, municipal initiatives, and I think our resources probably could have been better spent elsewhere, like millions, billions of dollars. I think that is a very real thing, but I also think if people who are just sort of like throwing DEI out there constantly actually put as much effort and thought as Sirota does into examining how corporate interests are like influencing this in a sort of financial way, there's even deeper elements to the story. I mean, as Sirota discovered in this case very quickly, he was able to put this story together that like there are economic forces that push, and it's not to say that people aren't talking about the confluence of like oligarchy and culture DEI stuff, but in this case, there are actual oligarchs that allow these things to happen, and we don't know the full story here yet. We do know that this boat had problems in an inspection recently in Chile. I think just in the last year, there were problems raised.
And it crashed into a pier in Brussels, I think. Not where it crashed into a pier somewhere in Europe in like 2016.
And John Conrad was talking about from G-Captain points out that it's not uncommon for ships that fail different parts of their inspections to keep operating if they don't rise to the level that's a serious threat. But that's the interesting part about this conversation on corporate interests, is that for different corporations, and I think Boeing is a really good example, some of these failures that can lead to loss of life, that can lead to huge infrastructure costs. We're not going to see all of traffic in Baltimore is going to be a nightmare for people for the foreseeable future. We're rerouting all of these car shipments, sugar, all of these things that go through the Port of Baltimore are going to be like routed on a 95, which is going to probably cause worsen traffic for regular people up and down the sort of Acela corridor, as it's called, in the upcoming months. But the problem is the cost of doing business has become such that some of these major corporations sacrifice these potential calamities as just like a cost of doing business. It could happen, but we can save money, and it probably won't. If it does, we'll pay for it. We'll take the public relations hit because we can afford it, and that will allow us to keep doing business.
Yeah. And on your DEI point, I have a slightly different take, although you might agree with it too. I think that there was an actual cost to corporate America to maintaining the kind of WASP cartel that it had for so many decades. There was actual racism for many decades in the leadership of corporate America, which still exists, and made those corporations less effective because it coddled underperforming WASPs, and it kept out higher performing non-WASPs. The way that DEI plays into this, though, is too often you'll bring in a DEI consultant after you get accused of some type of racial injustice inside your corporation, and that will be your answer, rather than making structural reforms that make you an actually better corporation.
Right. It's a PR Band-Aid.
The people in power will say, all right, well, we're going to have these consultants come in for 2 days, and you're going to examine your internalized racism, which is much more comfortable for a corporation to ask you to do than to examine the externalized corporate racism
Yeah.
At work, or what the corporation is actually doing in the world.
Yeah.
And so, to the extent that it furthers the kind of lack of diversity and the lack of racial justice inside an organization, it ends up being harmful. But then you have the reverse critique from actual racists who are like, "Oh, DEI just means black in my mind."
I think there's another important point in all of this about. So I was asking my dad about the state of bridges overall in America, because that was a huge conversation yesterday, especially when before we totally knew what had happened. There was tons of speculation about the bridges. And he described it as, he said that it's safe, but they need maintenance. That was like his overall take, that bridges in America are safe, but they generally need maintenance. And I think that's probably going to prove to have been true with the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It may have needed the cost of being retrofitted with giant fenders. Whether the fenders actually would have stopped that boat is a huge question. Like it's pretty, it looks like nothing would have stopped the boat from causing that bridge if you hit the pier like that to collapse. That said, John Conrad points out, he quote tweeted somebody who found that at one point, this is like it looks like it's an old newspaper blurb, that bridge could have actually been a tunnel, that some people said that this should have been a tunnel instead of a bridge, but the bridge was just easier, it was more cost effective at the time, and this is going all the way back to the 1970s.
There you go. Good call. Like there already is a harbor tunnel. Maybe when they rebuild it, they'll do another harbor tunnel. The clip you saw of Biden at the beginning was him saying that feds are going to pick this up. Nice if they found the Singaporean billionaire and had him pay for that.
It looks like the main questions here should be directed towards what happened with the ship, and that's where our focus should be going forward. Now, still, as Baltimore rebuilds over the course of, my gosh, I can't imagine how long this is going to take. That in and of itself is a big story. Conrad pointed out in another tweet that other countries can rebuild this type of infrastructure much more quickly than we can at this point. But it's just our system is not optimizing the potential of our workers in the United States. It's not, and it hasn't been for some time.
Your friend of the show, Matt Iglesias, had been joking earlier that the U.S. should hire Hamas to work on our subways, given the effective kind of tunnel structures they built. Have them do the harbor tunnel. I mean, imagine what they could do without having to smuggle everything in. It'd be impressive work, right?
I don't know if I should dignify this with a response.
Anyway, thank you to the control room for that one, because we moved all those elements all over the place. But
we were jumping around.
You guys were on top of it. Very much appreciated.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.